Well, it's been 20 months now since you took office, Mrs. Thatcher, an eventful 20 months to say the least. Indeed, you come to us fresh today after reshuffling the Cabinet. Can you tell us, with that reshuffling, what you hope to achieve?
Well, first, reshuffling isn't a job that any Prime Minister welcomes, because if you're to promote those who've done well, it means you've got to ask some people to relinquish their portfolios, and that's the difficult part. And you have to really grit your teeth to do it. But you've got to promote people who've been doing well. You've got to encourage people who are doing well on the backbenches that there'll be a place for them, and that you must do. It also gives the government a new momentum, a new dynamic. It reaffirms the direction in which we're going. And then, you know, there is another factor. Almost every interview I do, people say, and when are you going to reshuffle? And that induces a great uncertainty in people's minds. So you'd better get it over and done. And the time to do it is during a parliamentary recess. I felt I couldn't leave it much longer, so now it's done, the future is reaffirmed, and we'll go full steam ahead again.
What angers you rather a lot? Disloyalty and leaks of information. I mean, you've shown how displeased you've been with that. That has happened quite a bit in the government so far, hasn't it?
Leaks there have been, yes. They shouldn't happen, because it doesn't make for efficient cabinet government. If you feel that anything you say might be repeated outside, it should not happen. It shouldn't happen in any government. I hope it will happen less and less. I think people are very much aware of the damage that it's done. Disloyalty, it's not a question of being loyal or disloyal to a Prime Minister. Cabinet government consists in coming to a decision by discussion. What you should never do is say, all right, I'll go along with it inside Cabinet, provided outside I can say I don't agree. That is not Cabinet government, and it will weaken any government. We've had one or two problems. I hope we're through those. Our problem is this. Everything governments provide really have to come from the working population, who have to pay for education and for pensions, and for an increasing number of pensions. And of course it has to come out of contributions. If our questioner is not being able to manage, and I would be the first to understand her problems, then she must go and get extra pension from Social Security. She can. She noted particularly the fuel costs.
Yes.
I agree they are heavy. That's why we did provide an extra almost £200 million this year to try to help those worst in need, whether pensioners or young families, with their extra fuel costs. So in fact this year pensions have gone up slightly more than the cost of living. We have provided the extra fuel, but all the time the limiting factor is it isn't governments who provide the money. We have to get it from the working population, and they don't like spending too much out of their wage packet, either on income tax or on value-added tax or on contributions, and that's the limiting factor.
The unemployed
Yes.
teenager, she's crying for help too. She came from Scotland and has been in London a month and a half trying to find a job.
Well, if she doesn't soon find a job, she should soon tie up with what's called the Youth Opportunities Programme. And there we have undertaken to find a job for everyone under that programme. And we've increased the number of places, so I hope she'll go along soon to that, because we've put specially increased amounts of money into that, and many companies are cooperating magnificently. So I started with 1.4 million unemployed, and one of the reasons why that awful base level has gone on steadily mounting is that British industry is not as competitive as some of our other countries, as Germany, as Japan, as Switzerland, some really high standard of living countries. We're not as competitive, we're overmanned, full of restrictive practices. The result has been not a fall off in demand, but the result has been they've got the business and the jobs and we haven't. I'll give you one example. Sale of cars in this country last year, 1.5 million cars. And yet well over half of that went to foreign cars. Now you tell me, it wasn't shortage of cars, it was that we in this country weren't producing either the models or the price or the delivery that other people were. So we have to look at the state of our industry. Strikes, the thing that happened at the Metro on the rampage was terrible. If we're not going to buy our own goods, how can we expect other people to? So it is partly industry. We have come to the moment of truth on overmanning and restrictive practices. We shan't get right if we run away from that moment of truth. We must face it and get it right. And when we've got it right, there is a really big chance ahead for us and increased productivity. We really shall. The demand is there. We're not filling it. The amount spent on the whole social security, national insurance, is bigger than ever before because we have bigger pensions and more pensioners.
We have more pensioners who are living longer. It isn't simply that...
Indeed, I don't deny that. But Professor Blackstone, I have to get the money from the working population. It's on a pay-as-you-go scheme. We've just heard that someone is complaining, and quite rightly, about the enormously increased overheads that business has to bear. Some employers' contributions, some employees. If I might very respectfully say so, it's very easy to plead more money for someone else.
Of course it is,
I have
but I
to
think
try
it's
to
also
pursue
right to say
policies
that the
which
more
will create
humane
that
members
wealth.
of the working population would like to see our pensioners' position improve and like to see it reach that of pensioners in most European countries, which is certainly not at the moment.
I would be delighted.
But can I go on and just ask
No, but
my
please
question
let me
about
comment
education?
about that, because you
I'm
cannot put a question without giving me a chance to comment on it. I would like us to have a German standard of pensions. We shall have a German standard of pensions when we have a German standard of work.
But the last time that unemployment was rising as fast as it is now, though of course the numbers then were smaller, 1974, 1975, people said when the economy expanded there would be jobs for the unemployed. But there weren't. The same proportion of jobs were not created again. Now, that seems to me to be a pretty dismal prospect for the 3 million or so unemployed now projected for the end of the year. How can you see the economy expanding? Will it really expand to take up that number of unemployed people?
You're not going to get the extra jobs, I think, from the big companies for the simple reason that as the new technology moves in, it'll be as much as they can do to keep their existing labour force even on expansion. So you're really going to get it by small businesses starting up, small businesses expanding.
They have a very high failure rate, small businesses.
They have a very high birth rate too. We keep a value-added tax register. Yes, there is a failure rate of companies going off. The actual birth rate of companies coming onto that register is as great. At the moment, it slightly exceeds those going off.
But they are also, on the whole, small employers.
They are smaller. They, in fact, will expand. The organisations who are there to try to finance new businesses financed more last year, the Industrial Finance Corporation, start-up businesses than ever before in their history. They're financing all sorts of new operations. Now, you ask me, in this country, where are the new jobs going to come from? I must say to you that we're not getting a big enough share of the business that there is here, because many people who earn their living here are choosing to reject the products of their fellow workers in favour of imports. Now, for that we have to ask ourselves why. I already earlier gave the example of cars. Why?
Yes,
Why?
Yes,
but
we do
then, you see, the
accept
business
all that.
is there, but we're not doing it.
Yes, but we are talking about a very large rate of industrial expansion needed to provide
Indeed, we
3
are.
million jobs.
Indeed, and we're not going to get it unless we concentrate on industries being competitive, on their producing goods that British people like and will buy, on them producing on time, on not having strikes which interrupt flow, on people not pricing themselves out of jobs.
Doesn't that
if you
demand,
price yourselves out of jobs, if you demand more investment,
yes.
My goodness me, look at the example of the Times. They poured money into new machinery,
Which
but
would
the
have
people wouldn't
decreased
operate
jobs.
it. But the people wouldn't operate it. So in fact, for a year, they were out of business.
Prime Minister, you're now completing your third year in office, the third year of what's almost become your personal fight to get Britain back on its feet. Are we winning the battle of the economy?
I think we're winning. I think I could perhaps best describe it by saying I think we've laid the foundations for a competitive industry that can expand the moment we get improvement in world trade. And that's quite some achievement because we weren't competitive before.
In sort of historical terms, where are we? Have we just had the battle of Dunkirk, or the defeat at Dunkirk, or have we got as far as Alamein?
Oh, I don't think those analogies hold at all. We have to fight our battles every day. They're never won. You've got to sell your goods every day. You've got to be efficient every day. You've constantly got to think of the morrow. It's a daily battle for each and every day. There's been a world recession, not our fault. Germany, France, Europe suffering as well, some suffering even worse. Some got their unemployment actually rising faster than ours now. We're not responsible for that world recession, but I hope we're soon going to come out of it. Nevertheless, if we hadn't gone for the policies I've gone for, namely efficiency, increased productivity, getting the overmanning out of industry, we wouldn't be fit to compete with the Germans and Japs and French when we get an expansion in world trade. It has been difficult. What's happened is we've taken the overmanning and hidden unemployment out of industry, and it's come onto the unemployment register. But at least we've got an efficient industry from which to expand, and doing very well in exports.
If I may say so.
Yes, indeed. And you know, even countries like, for example, Germany, about 2 million, she was efficient. Her inflation is down to 6%. Even on a 2 million figure, it's much less than ours, but you have to remember, she and France have a whole year's conscription for all young people, so that takes a lot off the register. And you have to remember that she took in a lot of people for extra work when times were very good, but they left and went back to Turkey and Yugoslavia when times were not so good, so she lost jobs without getting increasing unemployment. Remember those things, even for countries that are very efficient.
What your critics say is that what is happening to the social fabric of the country, what is happening to the inner cities, what is happening last summer in the riots, these are all symptoms of 3 million unemployed, and that you may end up destroying more by the unemployed than you do by inflation.
I wouldn't say those riots were a symptom of unemployment. And I was interested that Lord Scarman did not put necessarily unemployment as high on his list. Indeed, it was very low. And indeed, you remember we had the Notting Hill riots years ago at a time of very considerable, almost full employment and very low inflation. So I don't think it's quite right to analyse it that way. But whichever way you take it, Mr. Gardner, there's not much point in going on commenting on it. We've got to say, how are we going to get the new jobs, the industries of the future, to compete with the Japanese? Because the Japanese have got the industries of the future. They embrace new technology, and they have not lost jobs through it. They've got very little unemployment. So we have to embrace new technology. We have to try to give help, and we are, to small businesses to start up and to expand. All that we are doing.
For all your talk of a change of attitude among trade unionists, among workers, that in fact determined men, if they use their industrial muscle, can win and get what they want.
And if you look at some of the trade union difficulties we're having now, you find they're pretty nearly all in the public sector. British Railways, London Transport's threatened to go on strike for a day, British Leyland. There's a strike up in the Teesside docks, which is stopping the gates for the Thames barrier coming down to London, and my goodness, we need them. All of those are in the public sector. Now, the public sector, you're quite right, where it has a monopoly, has muscle. And the tragedy today is that the trade unions have more capacity to harm their fellow trade unionists and fellow citizens than they have to defend those trade unionists and citizens from the harm they cause.
Why have you refused to have a public inquiry into the sinking of the Argentine cruiser Belgrano?
Because there's absolutely no need to have one. The advice was that this was a danger to our ships, particularly to the whole of our carrier group. Don't forget, the only air cover we had was from Hermes and Invincible. That was the advice, and so indeed we altered the rules of engagement to enable the Belgrano to be sunk. We had previously, several days before, indicated that the warning to the Argentines extended far beyond the exclusion zone. Indeed, it had to. There was an aircraft carrier group to the north, a cruiser group to the south. I had a very, very long supply line. They had submarines. We didn't know where they were. You have the luxury of knowing that we came through all right. I had the anxiety of worrying, how can I protect our people on Hermes, Invincible, the air cover, and the number of soldiers who were being carried on vessels which were going down there.